Welcome to this edition of our Committee on the Present Danger of China's webinar series, exploring various aspects of the challenges we face from communist China. In particular, the fact that for decades, the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, has been engaged in what has been called unrestricted warfare against our country. Indeed, in 2019, they upped that warfare to a people's war, or whole of society warfare. And there is abundant reason, as we have chronicled in many of these programs over the past 2 years, to believe that the Chinese aspire, if necessary, to take that up yet another notch to a shooting war. Well, we have made clear that these are facts over the past 200 plus of these programs. And yet there does seem to be some lingering misunderstanding, or at least lack of clarity, about whether the Chinese Communist Party is actually our enemy. We're going to talk a bit about some of the mixed signals that have come forth from senior officials of the United States government in recent days. In particular, we've taken note of the fact that the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, has made a number of comments in the past months about the prominent, if not absolutely central, concern about the Chinese military having been built up enormously, as we've documented in these programs, with our money, by the way, paying for much of it in the form of subventions of various kinds, in particular trade, unbalanced as it's been, and the financial resources of Wall Street, or more specifically, their clients in American pension funds and mutual funds and exchange-traded funds and the like, putting money into People's Liberation Army companies, among others, helping enable the biggest military buildup, arguably in history, certainly since World War II. Pete Hegseth has talked about the feature place that China will have in the national defense strategy, still apparently being massaged in the Pentagon. He has warned military leaders that there will be no rear areas in the next war, which certainly implicitly seems to be an allusion to the fact that we have multiple divisions of Chinese soldiers in this country that would render any such rear areas compromised at best and overrun at worst. And then there is the call that Pete Hegseth issued just late last week during his tour in East Asia with the ASEAN defense ministers, essentially urging them to up their game when it comes to situational awareness about the Chinese threat and military preparedness to contend with it. So it was all the more striking when on the 1st of November, the Secretary of War posted on X the following, and I'm going to read it in its entirety because I think it's important to the context of this conversation. He said, quote, "I just spoke to President Trump, and we agree the relationship between the United States and China has never been better. Following President Trump's historic meeting with Chairman Xi in South Korea, I had an equally positive meeting with my counterpart, China's Minister of National Defense, Admiral Dong Jun, in Malaysia. And we spoke again last night. The Admiral and I agree that peace, stability, and good relations are the best path for our two great and strong countries. As President Trump said, his historic G2 meeting set the tone for everlasting peace and success for the U.S. and China. The Department of War will do the same, peace through strength, mutual respect, and positive relations. Admiral Dong and I also agreed that we should set up military-to-military channels to deconflict and de-escalate any problems that arise.
If you watch President Trump on the 60 Minutes interview this Sunday, he was asked about why he gave a pardon to some Chinese Bitcoin guy. And, they only played the small clip about he didn't know who the guy was. I think he meant, I don't know the guy, I'm not friends with them. But then he went on to say the reason why he did that is because Bitcoin's important for our national security in his assessment. And he sees that the Chinese are trying to get into this arena and get ahead of us and control that digital currency or digital segment of society and our economy. And he said, I can't allow the Chinese to do that. And we've heard him say this over and over at different points in times where the mask comes down just for a brief second. And he tells the American people that it's China that's the threat, and we can't let China take control of rare earth elements or other critical industries that are critical for our national defense. So I think they're caught between this. I recognize the threat. We were put in a bad position. It's a result of 40 years of ineptitude and greed and avarice from our elites in Washington that were the China hands and our Wall Street crowd that wanted to, invest there and make money. It was a part, the Chinese Communist Party taking advantage of that, and this recognition that I'm the president who's got to get this together, and so I've got to take actions. You saw also in that same meeting that Hegseth had in Kuala Lumpur, he announced with the Filipinos a joint task force between the United States and the Philippines to patrol and to pay attention to what's going on in the South China Sea. So there's and Trump, I know we'll talk about it maybe later, is Trump's talk about resuming nuclear testing. So there's all these overwhelming evidence in my mind that President Trump understands the threat, is working to get the threat, mitigate these risks, but we're in a position of great vulnerability. And he's not going to, from his perspective, he's not going to unnecessarily antagonize Beijing because he needs to be able to play for time. So it's kind of a prevent defense. He needs to run the clock out in this first half and make sure that we go into the locker room able to regroup and come out in the second half and be able to play and win because we're in such a really terrible state right now. So. Worried about the fact that we allowed our nation to get put in this position, and we've got to do the things to get it out. My position would be, I'm not the president, but I would be a little bit more vocal about what we're trying to do. But President Trump's been very clear and from his perspective, and he said it again on the Sunday night. He goes, I'm not going to tell you my plans. So he's like a knuckleball pitcher. I mean, you don't know when the knuckleball's coming, but he's got it. And so I think that's where he's at in his approach. And all I can say is that we have to put some trust in that. It seems very, sometimes you worry, are they really on the track for this? Are they really dedicated to it? And my sense is you got to look at the actions. You got to look at what's being done. And that's the most important thing. Are we trying to build the Navy? Are we trying to get control away from the Chinese Communist Party for rare earth elements development and production? And it seems to me that President Trump's trip to Asia was all about signing a bunch of deals to try to get rare earth elements out of China's lock and to move it. Now, it's going to take time. It's going to take ingenuity, tenacity, and all of that to get it done. But it seems to me that's where he was.
As well as a faithful participant in these programs. And that would be, of course, Brian Kennedy. Brian is the former president of the Claremont Institute, the current president of the American Strategy Group, the author, among many other things, of Communist China's war inside America. Very important topic that we've addressed with his help frequently on these programs. Brian, it's good to have you with us. What do you make of what is again, seemingly a little bit of mixed messaging.
Thank you, Frank. In part, it may seem like mixed messaging, but I really think it's pretty consistent. Look, before I get too far, I would say I agree with everything Captain Fennell had to say there. He mentioned prevent defense. People who follow sports a lot will know that a prevent defense in football often prevents you from winning. And so I'm going to be a little contradictory there when it comes to that. What President Trump is doing right now, though, is not, prevent defense. He's trying to reconstitute America's strategic position in the world. We have lived, as you know very well, Frank, for decades and decades with a very incoherent understanding of America's, I think, both role in the world and the kind of defense that's required to have that role. At one level, he is similar, President Trump is, to Theodore Roosevelt, talk softly and carry a big stick. But in general, he's more of a George Washington. Look at all nations equally with the same kind of, good faith and justice, Washington's sort of famous words about that. And, the idea of treating all nations equally, sort of being objective about all of them, being equitable with all of them, you have that attitude until they cross you. And so President Trump is trying to reset how we think of things. He's trying to treat the Chinese, even though this is his second term, he's trying to give them a chance to do the right thing. And he does so in a moment where, as we well know, and as he well knows, they're not doing the right thing. So all this talk about, deconflicting things and all that kind of talk comes after, and the president knows all this, they've sent over 200,000 military-age men during the Biden administration, the Chinese have, into the United States for nefarious behavior. Those people today engage in marijuana grow houses. They operate all sorts of, illegal, or engage in all sorts of illegal activities here. They fly drones over our bases. They fly spy balloons over the United States. They run, as we know, and we've documented on these webinars, bioweapons labs, hidden within the United States. President Trump knows all that. He knows they're bad actors. He's also trying to rebuild the country. I think this is what Captain Fennell meant when he said prevent defense. We're trying to buy ourselves time here, and President Trump is engaged in this. We're trying to buy ourselves time to where we can get out of the rare earth, mess that we're in. A month before President Trump says this, they say they're going to cut us off from rare earth, metals, minerals, and magnets. That would be devastating to the U.S. economy. Devastating. Okay, so peace is not about to break out between countries who think like that. Okay? They're willing to destroy our economy. They make those threats. When they talk that way, what does President Trump say? That we're going to test our nuclear weapons and that we also have tools at our disposal that would be devastating to their economy. So I don't think peace is about to break out. You and I have had this conversation, Frank, but when I heard that Secretary Hegseth started talking about open lines of communication to be able to deconflict with the Chinese, I took that not to mean that things were going swimmingly, but that things were going badly. If you're about to go kinetic with your enemy, you might want to open lines of communication so that as things go up the escalatory ladder, especially to nuclear powers, we can at least be in open communication with them. If we were on the verge of peace, we wouldn't have to be highlighting to the world that we're opening up these lines of communication. So I took that rather differently. I thought things are going to get more aggressive between us and communist China. in part through no fault of our own, the Chinese ambition to dominate the Pacific and the world. The Chinese are still going to do everything they're doing. They're building an advanced military. They're building offensive nuclear weapons. They're building, a national missile defense themselves. They're engaged in the kind of military buildup that would lead one to the view that they're preparing for and ready to engage in war. Well, President Trump sees that. Secretary Hegseth sees that. What are we doing? We're building, a Golden Dome missile defense. We're rebuilding, we hope, even though this is mostly, I think, under the radar, we're rebuilding nuclear weapons. We're rebuilding our offensive forces. There's plans underway for all sorts of modernization of our military. Now, whether we get that done or not, you and I would like these things done and made public, Frank, in a much more open way, a much more public way, obviously. And that's not happening. But make no doubt about, there should be no doubt in anyone's mind that President Trump understands this, Secretary Hegseth understands this, and that they're working at breakneck speed to make sure that the United States is in a position to fight and win a war with Communist China. Today, we could fight and win a war, but at what cost is really the question. What would we lose in that contest? And we want to get much better than we are today. It's not going quickly enough. The president doesn't have enough people on the team yet to make sure this is a reality. But I'm confident that will happen over time. And I'd say, maybe in closing, Frank, that when you look at like the way the president thinks about these things, I think he does look back quite often to George Washington. And if one looks at Washington's farewell address, there's a line in there in the farewell address that you should never have consistent animosity or fondness for any nation. And if you do have, consistent over time, over decades, fondness for one nation or animosity toward one nation, you'll be a slave to both of them because you won't be able to see clearly what's going on. Well, for the better part of 4 decades, we've been having not merely unreasonable fondness for Communist China, but that they've been engaged in all sorts of nefarious activities with regards to the United States, and yet we treat them not merely with kid gloves, but with, we lend them money. We, allow them access to our capital markets. We let them steal our intellectual property. We give them our intellectual property. And so we have been a slave in the Washingtonian sense to Communist China. And President Trump is trying to break that up. And he's trying to both break it up, have Americans understand that, and rebuild the military and our diplomatic establishment to both understand that and to deal with that in the future. So I was quite encouraged by everything the president said. Talking about, testing nuclear weapons again is a sign that he's a realist. He knows that these things matter in the world and that he's going to build whatever it takes to defend these United States.
Known to his friends as Jeff. Jeff is a remarkably incisive strategic analyst. He is an author, including, among others, of the origins of the Fourth World War. He is an essayist. You can follow him on his wonderful blog, jrnyquist.blog. And you can, of course, see him with some regularity on these programs, for which we are always grateful. Jeff, you have long had a very informed view of what the Chinese are up to, and the Russians, informed, among other things, by what Stan Lunev, one of the most senior Russian defectors from the old Soviet Union, told you personally about the plans, including the plans for cooperation between the Soviets and the Chinese. Give us your take on what is, well, going on, for one thing, within the administration, as best one can discern it, but also how these comments are likely to be seen by our enemies, the Chinese, of course, most especially, but the Russians and others allied with them. Over to you, sir.
I should say, Lunev defected under the Russian Federation, and the information he had about China was about what had begun under Boris Yeltsin, which is what's so shocking about the information. Is China an enemy? According to the defector, and yes, China was an enemy 34 years ago when after the Soviet Union collapsed. It is an enemy today. We can see it. It's quite obvious. Not to belabor the point, so many people here have gone into it. And of course, the problem is, you know, Mao Zedong wrote an essay in 1927, and he said the first rule in politics is to know who your friends are and know who your enemies are. If you cannot do that, everything else that follows is wrong. You're going to get it all wrong. And it's interesting, it's been recorded after Deng Xiaoping met with President Jimmy Carter in 1979, Mr. Deng told his colleagues that they had to be careful not to misunderstand the work that China was beginning with the United States, the opening to the U.S. And he said, all past presidents, all present presidents, and future presidents of the United States are our enemies. We know what camp we are in. We are in the socialist camp. Therefore, we know the Americans are we are against them. If Deng Xiaoping had such clarity, you have the statements of President Xi Jinping, the president of China now, who is saying, who has said similar things in different venues, has said that we must study Mao Zedong thought. And of course, Mao Zedong thought is the Americans are our enemies. It's Marxism-Leninism in the Chinese context. It is no doubt controversial to say this, but our commercial society has been very stupid. One could say radically stupid in accepting China as a partner, a trading partner, even accepting China as an ally to use against the Soviet Union in the 1970s and 80s. This was a mistake. We have built up China, and China is on its own now, a very formidable enemy, becoming more formidable by the day, the largest industrial power on earth, a colossus, a country with enormous population and capacity. This radical stupidity of doing this, which is a characteristic, by the way, of bourgeois society. Karl Marx made a career of making fun of the bourgeoisie and saying they could easily be overthrown. They're not a proper ruling class. And you had Hannah Arendt, who in the Adolf Eichmann trial, Eichmann in Jerusalem was the book, coined the term banality of evil. Eichmann was a bourgeois who turned against his own class and had joined this totalitarian movement. But we might use another phrase, not the banality of evil, but the evil of imbecility. There is a special kind of imbecility. I don't mean to cast aspersions on the congenitally imbecilic, but to people who make imbecility as a choice. That is, they decide to be stupid. They decide to fool themselves. This then opens a question of the moral responsibility of our leaders. And this is a very troubling thing. And I'm talking about our business leaders, especially because they've led the way on this. The politicians and our society are very influenced by the business community. And the fact is that knowledge is our responsibility as human beings. Aristotle said that we are the rational animal. And if we set aside our rationality and say, well, I'm just following orders, I'm not a rational being like Adolf Eichmann did, and pretend to be, well, I'm too stupid, I need to follow the Fuhrer, or I need to follow the business community, they know best, and millions of deaths result, because if you kill people in gas ovens or you irresponsibly disarm yourself to an enemy and allow millions to die that way, what's the difference? You're killing millions of people by your irresponsibility, by basically setting aside your responsibility as a human being not to be a monkey. And we really have this, there's an anti-intellectual part of our culture that is developed that has caused people to think it's fashionable to not think, but it's deadly. And in foreign policy, look, in the 19th century, people like to use the analogy. Thomas Carlyle used it in his writings against the Revolution of 1848. The analogy of a ship with a captain. A state is often been compared to a ship, and the statesman to a helmsman. And if you do not know what you're doing and you're trying to go around Cape Horn, let's say in a sailing ship in the old wooden ship days, if you didn't know what you were doing, you were going to kill yourself and the crew. If you knew that a ship was not seaworthy and you put it to sea with passengers and those passengers sank mid-ocean, you were killing those people by your negligence, by saying, well, I think it's good enough, but you're not really being honest. There was a writer, his name was Clifford, W.K. Clifford. He wrote a very famous essay on the ethics of belief. Well, arriving at a belief through not thinking. The ethics of belief is that one does not have a right, and this is his exact quote, one does not have a right to turn off one's brain. And one has a responsibility when one is a statesman or the head of a corporation, one has in their care not only their employees and customers, but the whole society because of the consequences of what you're doing. And the consequence of accepting China as a trading partner and enemy is to entangle yourself with evil, right? Like Eichmann did by joining the Nazi Party and participating in the moving of Jews to gas chambers, to death camps. Once you compromise yourself, what further compromises are you obligated to make? What lies are you then obligated to tell? This is the chain of events we've seen in our society, especially in the business community, of letting China in, letting China wrap its tentacles around our businessmen. And we have to break free of this. And the president has to lead the way in doing this. He cannot go back and be drawn back in and be entangled in the tentacles himself. And so if we are to actually acknowledge the truth, which is China wants to destroy the United States, which is what Colonel Lunev, his testimony as a defector, said. Look, he said after the Soviet Union collapsed, the Russian and Chinese militaries got together and they started a plan to destroy the United States of America. This is what China's leaders and Russia's leaders are intent upon. And they have held with it. And you see everything Russia and China is doing, whether it's in Europe or in East Asia or in Latin America, in Mexico, using fentanyl across our borders, infiltrating PLA personnel as illegal aliens. All of these things, the way they've infiltrated Canada, look at the Sidewinder report. We are facing an extremely grave danger, the gravest danger our republic has ever faced.
Trevor is also a member of our Committee on the Present Danger of China, I'm very proud to say, and fellow of our Institute for the American Future. He is, I think, brilliantly equipped to help us understand something that Jeff kind of introduced there, and that is, will we, by signaling, as some of the rhetoric that is coming forth from the administration, I think inevitably does, that we're good with China, that those captured elites will feel free to continue to engage in the kind of, solidarity with our mortal enemy, to put it mildly, and treachery at worst. Trevor, thank you for joining us as always, and I apologize for the difficulties getting you on the show, but we're delighted you're here, and the floor is yours, sir.
Well, thank you so much, Frank. And I very much agree with Jeff's point that President Trump must be the leader of a disengagement with China, which is what he campaigned upon, because these captured elites, they're going to be making money with no conscience, no matter what it does to America, because the president has okayed it. The government says it's all right. So therefore, it must be morally sound. Now, somebody, as I have a religious outlook on life, I believe that morality in foreign affairs is very important, and it does count for something. I think God favors godly people in matters of statecraft. And to get the United States of America, which should be the leader of the free world, it should be standing against the evil empire, the resurgent evil empire of Russia, China, Iran, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and all of their allies, Cuba and all of their allies. I think it's very disappointing to see that that's not happening. And why would the elites, why would the pension funds and the Wall Street lawyers and the bankers and the brokers and the big tech titans and the academics want to decouple from the very lucrative Chinese gravy train when the government isn't going to do it? President Trump campaigned on getting rid of 300,000 Chinese students from America, all of whom are basically part of the Chinese United Front, the intelligence and military apparatus. At one point, he wanted to increase it to 600,000, but he got such a blowback from that he cut it back to, he scotched that idea, but the 300,000 still remain. Look, I want to add, look, in New Zealand, my personal lawyer, who I love dearly, a very, very fine man, very good conservative, shocked me one day when I walked into his office and told me about his recent trip to China. And told me, Trevor, he said, the Chinese Communist Party really knows how to look after people. And he told me about his 7-day free, all expenses paid trip on the Yangtze River, sailing down the river, wined and dined, meeting all the dignitaries he could possibly imagine. And as though this was a good thing. You know, I wonder if he'd would have been so proud of taking a tour down the Rhine for a week in 1939 and hobnobbing with Nazi leaders and, you know, Heinrich Himmler and whatever, because that is the analogous situation here. The people who are dealing with China, who are meshing us with business deals with China, are no better morally than those who collaborated with the Nazis right up to the dawn of World War I, even World War II, even during World War II in some cases. And we look at those people with disgust today, but many of our leaders are in the same position right now. And why are they doing it? Because the government allows them to do it and doesn't chastise or punish them for doing it. You know, right now, the Chinese, we just had the election of Mamdani's election in New York. Now, we've got to understand that he's a member of Democratic Socialist America, which is a pro-Cuban Communist Party that is now currently developing links with the Communist Party of China and has deep ties to the Venezuelans and many other Latin American communist parties. And one of the main groups that were campaigning for Mamdani was a group called Seed the Vote. This is the pro-Chinese voter registration organization that basically won the 2020 election for Biden-Harris. They run a whole network of Chinese-influenced voter registration organizations in all of the key states. They also played a major role after the last election of curing the ballots of seats in California, which flipped 3 seats for the Democrats after the election in California, because curing the ballot basically means you go out and find people whose ballots were not submitted correctly, and you get them to cure them. and Seed the Vote advertised for people to help them cure the ballots so that Trump would get less of a majority. They put this on Facebook. This is a group that has intimate connections to the Chinese consulate in San Francisco. So Mandami is going to be a major thorn in Trump's side. The Chinese are interfering in elections. They did it in 2020, 2022, 2024, and no doubt they'll do it again in 2026. The Chinese are basically the ones who flipped Virginia, which I've spoken about many times. They turned deep red Virginia to blue Virginia, and now it's gone right back blue again. That's through basically done by a Chinese sponsored operation called New Virginia Majority, which uses maps generated out of the geography department of Wuhan University, China. So this is friendly. This is we're in a good space with China right now. Well, they're undermining us in every way while they're working with the Venezuelans and the Mexicans and the Cubans against us at every turn. Trump's down there right now challenging Venezuela, which I very much welcome. But the Chinese are deeply embedded with the Venezuelans. So how are they our friends? I don't quite understand this. I think, looking at President Trump, I think he doesn't believe that foreign governments are motivated by ideology. He looks at Marxist-Leninist China. He looks at communist Venezuela. He looks at Putin, Marxist-Leninist Eurasianist Russia. And he doesn't believe that their leaders are actually motivated by ideology. He thinks that, like most leaders around the world, they're motivated either by the well-being of their peoples or personal gain. And I think he thinks that he can deal with China, he can deal with the Russians, he can deal with Venezuela or whatever, and get them to accept deals, or the Iranians especially, that would be in the best interest of their people. But these countries are led by people who have a millennialist view, either Marxist-Leninist, they believe in the world revolution, or a 12 view, a Shia view of bringing back the 12th Imam and bringing forward the Day of Judgment like the Iranians do. And they're not really interested in hotels in their capital cities or business deals. They're interested in spreading their ideology and obeying either obeying either Allah or the God of Marxist-Leninism or the ideology of Eurasianism. And so I think this is the main problem we're facing here, that the president really needs to finish Reagan's job with the right amount of sanctions, the right amount of carrot, the right amount of stick. He could basically depose the Putin regime in Russia without a great problem. He could force the CCP into collapse, which would be a fantastic boon for the world, and allow Israel to finish off the job by destroying the Iranian military, which has now been quickly rebuilt, and allow the Iranian people to finish the job. Wouldn't it be great if we had friendly regimes in Russia and China and Iran who had cast off their old ideological baggage? So that's what I see the issue is here, is that China is absolutely the enemy. Jeff has pointed out their goal is to destroy us, not to outcompete us, to physically destroy us and occupy our land. They may leave a few to be enslaved for a while until we work to death, but that's what we're facing. They're as bad an enemy as the Nazis or anyone else we have ever faced. And until we get our heads around that and use our leverage to bring them down to the benefit of all of us, we're going to be constantly spending. We're going to be making billions of dollars every year trading with the Chinese and spending trillions of dollars trying to counter what we've created.
the captured elite, of course. We're dealing with the American people on all of this as well. And I must say that my biggest concern, and I don't make light of the enemies within, Trevor, that are, profiting handsomely from their ties to the Chinese communists, usually financially, but sometimes otherwise. But the American people are not being sufficiently clearly equipped to understand that we are in, as Reagan used to say, an existential fight for freedom. I'm sure that they hear some of the kinds of warnings that we're making and others, and some, like, Pete Hegseth. But I'm sure that, as is generally the case, democratic societies especially, they just assume not be worried about the state of the world or threats to them, their families, their communities. They'd like to assume that competent people that perhaps have elected to represent them and govern them, are in charge and are taking care of things. And so there's really nothing to worry about. And consequently, when that is kind of confirmed by those leaders, even if it's for the purposes of not ruffling feathers or buying time or otherwise trying to navigate a difficult pass, I just have to say, I think that we are not allowing them to become prepared psychologically, let alone, physically, for what may be in the offing, as we've discussed here, mentioned it earlier many times, possibly a shooting war right here in the United States. And Brian, I appreciated you putting a number on it. I don't know what the right number is, whether it's 100,000, 50,000, 200,000 more of these People's Liberation Army individuals who seem to have come into our country with at least the acquiescence, if not the complicity, of the Biden administration and its open border policies. That could make this a very messy business. And if the public is not steeled against it or even clued up, we've talked about this, final thought, in the past in connection with the idea of having them crowdsource the sort of situational awareness we need to know. Brian, you mentioned in grow houses and, other operations around this country, biological weapons labs and so on. If the public knows what they're to look for in order to enable them to see something, say something, we have a shot at making our own society more resilient. So what do you make of this further fillip that speaking softly or speaking endearingly even about the Chinese Communist Party is undermining that prerequisite for an informed and hopefully engaged public in this struggle against our mortal enemy?
First, about President Trump, and here I'll disagree with Trevor. I believe he does understand. First of all, I think he trusts no one. Okay? He has political enemies in this country that have tried to kill him. So I think he trusts no one, whether it's in this country or in other countries. I think he understands them in an ideological way. He sees them as radical leftists. He sees them as communists. He sees them as people who are enemies to human freedom. He doesn't rhetorically talk that way, however, because he speaks in a simple language that he hopes everyone can understand. When he's talking to foreign nations, he tends to be overly nice and flamboyant in his language, saying, "She is my good friend. We get along great." Well, President Trump understands what friendship is. He knows that Xi Jinping is not his friend. But he tries to kill him with kindness because when Xi Jinping does the wrong thing, then it looks like a real betrayal of a friend to another friend. But does President Trump trust Xi Jinping? No. He knows on a daily basis the Chinese are stealing our intellectual property. This is what caused the People's War Declaration in 2019. So he knows what the score is here, but what language he uses is a kind of Trumpian, I'll even say, as I said in my previous remarks, kind of Washingtonian. He wants to treat everybody equally. He wants to give them a chance, knowing that they could be good guys or bad guys, and act accordingly. He is also really trying to rebuild the country. He has a commercial class which is craven and immoral and would sell their mothers out to the communist Chinese for a buck. These are the people the president has to invite to the White House to figure out ways of getting the U.S. economy in growth mode. All those tech bros or the tech overlords, however you want to describe them, they're the ones who would sell out their mothers. They don't care about the American people. They don't care about America. They would sell us out. And yet, in many ways, they're the driving force of parts, a significant part of the U.S. economy. And so, did President Trump want it that way? No. Is it that way? Unfortunately, yes. And so he's trying to transition the U.S. economy at a time when he's trying to transition the U.S. strategic posture. So he's trying to keep the economy going as best he can. And so he knows that if he completely alienates China today and we're denied rare earth minerals, he was told not that long ago that the stock market, the Dow Jones, would be cut in half. Whether that was true or not, I don't know. But it's not inconceivable that if you shut down Ford Motors, GM, other manufacturing in this country, there'll be a real loss of confidence in the American system. Could we rebuild that system? Yes. But at what cost? Again, President Trump's trying to bridge the gap between how screwed up we are and where he wants us to be. And in the meantime, the Chinese have us over a barrel when it comes to rare earth minerals and several other things. Are we prepared today to completely abandon or substantially abandon a tech-based economy? And I think the answer is no. Could we? Yes. Over time, absolutely. They want to threaten to cut off our rare earth minerals. Fine, cut them off. We don't need you. I believe, as do many of us, in a complete decoupling from communist China. It's how we get there. We have to produce these rare earth minerals either here in North America or South America, get them online. That's going to take another year and a half. We're going to have to build these chips. Do we build any of these chips here in the United States? Every chip we're producing in Arizona has to go to Taiwan for finishing. So we don't have that down right. You start going through our whole supply chain, and we've exported our manufacturing base. So whatever we see in President Trump, I believe he is as serious about making America great again as he says. And what he means is not just making money, but making things here in the United States with American workers. The awkward part will be this transition from how screwed we are today to where we need to be. And rhetorically, he's going to say a lot of things during that are very unpleasant because, we still need communist China and their materials right now because of how stupid we've been. And so, I think, the administration is not perfect. I think we're making a big mistake on AI. I think we're not seeing certain things economically that we have to get right. But, all the folks I talk to in Washington, there's going to be clarity in this national security document about just how serious the threats are to this country. And I believe that starts with President Trump and how he sees the world. Whether he says it that way on any given day, okay, we can quibble about that. He doesn't do it, to my satisfaction all the time either. But I believe he is absolutely serious about